Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great webinar on tap. Got lots of things going on today, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for either of our speakers, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions. And we'll try to get to as many as we can near the end of today's webinar. And also at the end of today's webinar, we are going to be doing a drawing for two $50 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our two lucky winners. All right, with that, we will go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is how to enable remote work and enterprise software delivery. Our speakers today are Jeffrey Keyes, who is VP of Product at Plutora, and Matt Drury, who is Director of Customer Success at Plutora. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, Jeff, go ahead, take it away. I'll put myself on mute.
Awesome. Well, I love being together with you this morning, this afternoon, wherever you are, to dive into this topic because a lot has changed in the last 3 months. And I'm especially excited to bring Matt Drury as a voice of reality with me on what's happening in the world today, as the entirety of your time, Matt, is working with some of the largest and most complex enterprises of the world today. I know you're focused in the UK, and I know you're seeing this stuff firsthand. But thanks for coming out, Matt, and being on board today.
My pleasure.
So what we're going to talk about today is really a look at what has happened over the last 4 months in terms of reconnecting our remote software delivery factories, because a lot's changed, and then how that applies to value stream management platforms and some tips to really navigate this new world that we live in. Over the past 20 years, work really focused on strong people-to-people interactions. I mean, even if you look back at like the Agile Manifesto, it focused on face-to-face meetings versus doing documentation. The whole idea is that the most powerful connections you could have with people were focused on these interpersonal communications and having particular meetings that were, stand-up meetings are in person. Sprint reviews, postmortems, all these were intended to be really in person. And these are the most essential components of Agile and DevOps, are focused on these in-person kind of meetings. So a lot has changed here. Matt, what are you seeing? How big of a culture change has it been, with the customers you work with, of not being able to work in person? What are you seeing?
Yeah, look, Jeff, I think it's massive. I think you can't overstate how big of a change it has been for a lot of our customers. In fact, nearly all of our customers. Obviously, it's historically people have worked face to face, at least for the majority of the time, whether it be on site. But that is now not the case, and it's been a huge shift.
Well, what kind of reactions have you gotten to this change? I mean, it's not like they chose to do this, or maybe some of them were excited. What have you seen? What has their reaction been?
Yeah, look, it's been surprisingly good, and I think that's it shows the resilience of not only people but companies in general. Is where you have to do something, you get on and you do it, and it's been great to see that a lot of these people have transitioned quickly and efficiently into this kind of new way of working.
Yeah, well, and you bring up a good point. It's a new way of working. In fact, I'm hearing a lot of people call it the new normal. We already have distributed teams. Now we're going to have distributed and remote teammates. We used to have distributed tools. Now we have tools that have to be available across a VPN or outside. And these tools have been gaining traction over the last 20 years, but now they got to work. People have to figure out and have had to figure out how to make all these things work when people are working from home. And that while most companies, I think, have focused on remote work as sort of like a part-time and a just occasional, hey, if I happen to be sick or if I've got a child at home that's got a particular issue, okay, fine, take a day here or a day there. But everything's changed. This new normal, I think people are going to get really more comfortable with and used to. And I think this is why collaboration and meeting tools that, hadn't previously been adopted now have been, they've really become central to most development work. What do you think will be the new normal for the companies that you're working with, Matt?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we are definitely in a transitional stage right now. The term, new normal. I think nobody really knows exactly where this ends and, the end point, right? I think we're all kind of learning together, which has been really cool. I think as everyone goes through this together, we find comfort in the fact that, this is transitional and nobody's an expert in this by any means, as far as kind of we're all trial by error at the moment. But it's been really cool to see, the positivity and the acceptance of this change. So obviously communication methods is probably the fundamental thing that I've seen change with these teams. So kind of how do we, one, communicate and make sure that we're all working towards the same thing and the right goals. So whether that be, taking where we would be in a meeting room together or side of desk activities on a floor in an office, to Zoom calls or Slack messaging, an array of different ways. So.
Yeah, totally. I was recently reading one of the statistics. If you had to guess at the percentage of remote work as business continuity prior to 2020, it was less than 30%. Gartner predicts that by 2022, 90% of agile development teams will include remote work as part of that standard business practice. Amazing how much, the world has changed. We got forced into doing it, and now that really, changed everything. And working from home really broke how things work together, because there's so many just customary activities, walking up to somebody else's desk because I know I have a particular issue I've got to solve, holding an ad hoc meeting because I've got to bring people together and trying to solve things. The customary, let's get in front of a whiteboard and make things work. It's really interesting of how that's gone, even particularly from an agile perspective. Agile teams getting used to, okay, every morning we're gonna have a stand up and let's go stand in that conference room. Let's take our 15 minutes. Let's go through the key issues, the blockers, and how that's going to work. Well, remote teams are going to face constraints in this delivery process, and it's really, frankly, it's going to lead to delays unless you tackle some of the core issues that apply. Trying to make sure that you can align with people's schedules and things that are happening at home. There's other distractions at homes. What makes it even harder is some of the existing tools, technologies may not really work for remote work, and it makes it even more difficult. If the only tool a person has is, let me just jump on a Zoom call, well, I've still got to schedule that. How do I get the links there, the emailing it around? How many times have we heard, is this thing on? Can you hear me? Why isn't my webcam working? How do I do a remote session? It's just tougher. Matt, do any of these connection points or areas of flow stand out as being more challenging than others in the new normal?
Look, I think they're all challenging in their own rights. I think you've touched on the information flow, right? So how do we communicate messages between each other? Obviously, we've done a really good job of, like I said, picking up Zoom calls and deferring to other applications like Slack, or I guess emails has always been there, but probably more emails. But how do we then convey that into a flow of work? How do we prioritize our tasks, etc.? That's obviously a challenge. It always has been, but being able to communicate through that framework is obviously is huge. And then flow of value as well. I think for a lot of these customers, it's being about first of all creating resiliency within what we're delivering out to market. There's been a big shift in our customers in what they are actually prioritizing as value. There's a big push between from a lot of our customers in kind of resilience and what we're delivering needs to enable remote working, etc. So yeah, it's been huge, but I think all three of those points are, very, very important.
Cool. Well, and I like to look at these from, you know, I'd like to look at these from maybe 4 particular areas or challenges to tackle, and then we can offer some tips of how a strategy for addressing these. But the first of these is the ability to collaborate remotely in a fast-paced environment. The whole goal of Agile, the iterative development. How do you work together like that when you've got a fast-paced environment, people are needing things and information right now, and how do I know what's going on? How do I make sure that I'm working well with the next person? One of my roles is I'm a product manager. My dev team is in Australia. How do I make sure they've got what they need when they need it? Time overlap's tough. Second problem to look at is, well, how do you actually manage teams remotely? Because all that's different. I can't just look around the room and see where people are. I can't ask per se what's going on. We've got different geographies and locations, and it's hard to really make that happen. I can't necessarily just call a person into a room at different times, make sure that the right things are going on. And ultimately, in the development process, ensuring governance and compliance, governance to make sure that we're truly following best practices. And at the same time, being able to provide compliance reporting that we're adhering to GDPR or HIPAA or whatever kind of standard compliance that we're beholden to. And then ultimately, wherever we are, there we need to look at software delivery as a continual journey of improvement. And how do we come up with a continuous method of improvement for every development team, regardless of wherever they are, in their maturity process? Matt, thinking about this, if, for example, if Slack or email were your only tool to solve some of these problems, do you think that'd be enough?
Definitely not. Definitely not. I think they are great tools. They stand alone and they are crucial. We all use them day in, day out, right? But obviously, if they are your only tool sets, you're inheriting risk, lack of visibility and governance. I'm guilty of it as well. I think, I'll call it the old world, but, going up to someone, it can be quite quick walking up, hey, can you do me a favor? Can you kind of do this really quickly, etc., right? But there's no auditability, no traceability, and therefore there's no governance and that sort of stuff. So, Slack is great as a part of a communication stream, but singularly, it'll fall over.
Absolutely. I've heard other management styles that just only have Zoom meetings, and that's the management style of tracking the team as, okay, let's do a Zoom meeting. I'm going to hear what everybody's doing. You see any problems with that, or have you heard of that as well?
Yeah, look, again, I think Zoom meetings are great in moderation. It's funny, I use the analogy, can you ever imagine having a meeting with your colleagues on a daily basis where half of them get locked out of the room and can't get in? It's it creates these, yeah, exactly. It creates these kind of inefficiencies in time. It is good to keep rapport and kind of keep that human interaction going, but by no means is it a timely way of communicating. So, in moderation, it works really well. But there are definitely better ways through tooling.
Excellent. And I've also heard people, from a compliance point of view, trying to chase issues and compliance issues through email. What's your thoughts on trying to track, using email as the primary method of chasing issues?
Yeah, look, it's okay. I think is the best way to call it. I mean, it serves a purpose, right? We all email every day, but I'm sure that this might, this will resonate as well. It's, if you come to me 2 years from now and say, hey, remember on, the 5th of May, 2020, I asked you for X or Y, you got to trawl through that, it might have been deleted, etc. So from an archiving standpoint, it's pretty loose and very hard to kind of retrieve. But also from a workflow perspective as well, you don't have your approvals and your governance that go along with a governed workflow. So yeah,
absolutely. And I love that we're at the birth of a category of tools today that help us with all these problems. Um, Really, that tool set or that category of tools is known as a value stream management platform. And whether you're dealing with a value stream management delivery platform or just an abstracted value stream management platform, the whole point is to sit above the tool chain itself and provide really four key capabilities, independent of the tools themselves that are in the software development lifecycle. So the core value that a value stream management platform offers is, one, to converge the tool chain, to make the individual tools talk to each other so that the planning works with the code and build, works with the verification and test, works with the deployment and release, works with the configuration and infrastructure as code, all the way into operations, such that if someone goes on the operations side and creates a help desk ticket, that can flow back and create a defect for the development to see, and then when development works on it, that can flow back and forth. You can trace the higher level initiatives from the planning perspective all the way through and start to answer some fundamental questions of delivery, like where's my feature and how far along is it? When will it really be there? What's the risk of these features going through? What's the efficiency and so forth? That's the point of bringing the tool chain together, is to correlate this data together in a way that is meaningful. The second big value of a value stream management platform is to provide the business intelligence, so you can have some kind of analytics to connect all the analytics on top of the tools, independent of the tools themselves. And ultimately, that business intelligence combined with the converged tool chains truly gives you an enablement to provide both automation and orchestration, so you can set up best practices, you can templatize it, and provide governance at scale. So ensuring that you're doing the right things. And then the reporting can provide the compliance reporting as you need out of the platform. So, Matt, have you seen value stream management help connect geographically separated or remote teams? Have you seen what that's done for them?
Yeah, day in, day out. I think it's key, right? I think we all do different activities as a part of our day. And it's important that people, at certain points can report on what we're doing. But quite often the reporting can take as long as the activity itself. So, if I'm building a feature or whatever it is, to then and working inside of, something like Jira, to then go and complete my task, that's fine. But then to be able to report on that manually can take just as long, right? So what we find is that a lot of our customers like to be able to obviously integrate and take data points from all of these different tools that matter, and bring them into a centralized place so that they can do that reporting proactively, but also automatically as well, right? So it's just bubbles to the top, and you can do meaningful metrics reporting without having to obviously have that human interaction or that human intervention.
That's right. I've heard that described as, all that data gathering should be automatic and should be transparent and just flow naturally in between the different systems. So do you think, well, here's a harder question. Do you think all teams are ready to adopt value stream management?
Yeah, look, it's, I'll pause for a second because I think there's a little bit to this. I think the short answer is yes. I think all teams are. I think, and I've been guilty of this in the past as well, of looking at value stream management sometimes as kind of the end-to-end delivery of your software. Okay, so basically from ideation through to delivery and everything in between. And you need the full picture to get value stream. But the reality is that each part of that is a bit. And by having any of those bits inside of an application where it might have been in a spreadsheet previously, is rolling up to value stream, right? So the short answer is, whether you're using spreadsheets today or a tool, yes, absolutely. Every team is positioned for it. Tools like Platora or any of these sub applications that you might see on the screen here ultimately better that process to help you derive better value.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about some of the tips of how to handle this new way of working. And the first tip is collaborating remotely for development teams. In this new normal, collaboration requires a different kind of understanding of work. If the intent is to communicate that work via meetings, or I've got a spreadsheet, that's going to be a little tough. And so really the first tip here is start focusing your collaboration not on the meetings, but focus on collaborating with a shared understanding of work, meaning put the information in a system, capture that work into a single system, and have that data roll from whatever that system you're using into a common data model across the different teams and so forth. The point of value stream management is it aggregates that together. What's that mean? For example, if you use a spreadsheet as, let's pretend you were using a spreadsheet as your work tracking system. Well, you're much better to use a system like Jira or version 1 or Azure DevOps where you're tracking your work. And then have the various teams that are tracking their work in there have another system that's a value stream management platform, roll that data together so to make that work visible and be able to communicate that across the various teams. If you're dealing with managing environments, for example, and you've got a spreadsheet where you're tracking the work list of environments that need to get tilted up, or you've got legacy environments that need work done on them, go to a system to where you can track that in a way that's automatically visible and the collaboration just happens. Matt, what are some of your customers doing with the management of work or milestones to help collaboration in this way?
Yeah, look, I think the key to all of this is, when we say milestones, it's kind of significant activity, and we all do, millions of things all the time, right? But it's the key activities that you want to be calling out. And I think, you raised environment management as an example, and for my customers here in the UK, a lot of people are using Platora for their test environment management.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of the key things for these people are going to be kind of who's using what, when, and why. So
Right.
which projects are using which environments, what is actually on an environment at any one given time, its text and specs and its configurations, etc. And then from that deriving stuff like utilization reporting, etc. But it's the key milestone activities that will actually let you know when someone's either ready to leave or ready to come into an environment. Are they compliant? All that sort of stuff. So being able to call out key markers along the way to mitigate risk is crucial.
And kind of follow on that, before they became customers, how did they used to manage that kind of work?
Poorly. Look, it depends, right? It's kind of everyone's on a maturity journey. So I see people come to Platora and myself kind of on that maturity bell curve of anywhere from greenfields and spreadsheets to maybe 1 or 2 different applications. However they are, they've always struggled with a visible way of seeing without maintaining a spreadsheet. Who is in each environment, kind of what are its parts, what application are we running on that particular environment. All of that traceability and visibility was very, very difficult.
Absolutely. Which kind of focuses on the next bit of this kind of collaboration is a focus change. It's not that the communication doesn't happen, it's just how it happens is different. And when you have teams that are located, co-located, and everybody's together, you can basically handle the communication because you can have a big meeting, you can have a quick stand-up, you can do just a quick phone call and conference call and make things happen in that way. And you might be able to just quickly, call out in the hallway, hey, something's happening, and people will kind of know what's going on because people are there. With remote teams, all that's changed now. All those communication methods, with the exception of email, are harder. It's not that you can't do phone calls, but coordinating and making sure that you can schedule the time gets harder, especially when there's not a lot of lead time for it. You can't just call out, hey, in 5 minutes, we're going to do a quick email or do a quick meeting. Oftentimes that becomes more challenging. The change that really makes this effective is to stop planning on those broad style communications, but get your information into the systems. and then use those systems for notifications when there's problems. Anyone that's interested in what's going on can look at live dashboards, or get notified via various chat ops and so forth for the different conversations. And make sure when you do your stand-ups, when you do need to spend those times where you're going to get the group together, to do video as much as you can. Um, and in this way, you have uh, a repeatable, consistent way of making sure that you're always up to date. You're not reliant or beholden on the effectiveness of corralling and getting the folks together, if you will, because it's in the systems and it's durable. You can make sure that the right things are happening because it's all tracked. So Matt, along those lines, how have you seen teams handle these changes in the communication style and this new working from home normal?
Yeah, look, I think the two key points you brushed over, right? I think it's about integrating with tools where that information already resides so that it's
Mm-hmm.
easily accessible. So I've seen a big uptake in the demand for integrating to different applications where
Mm-hmm.
we've always had these key integration points with Platora. I think there's definitely a change and a thirst to get more information in, so that this reporting can be automated rather than having to be manually compiled all the time. But also a key point of that is that email notification stuff as well. So where activities or milestones or compliance might have an issue or it's completed, it could be a positive as well. Having a system that can automatically send out touch bases and correspondence via email without having to go and type in an email, add a distribution list or individual users and send that each time. Either you're going to forget it, it's going to be late, whatever it might be, it becomes an overhead. So I think the automation of those alerts via email it has become even more crucial than they were before.
Yeah, it sort of becomes managed, you're sort of watching the collaboration by exception. And when you want to find out what's going on, you look for what you need when you need it versus constant communication where you're trying to filter through that communication to figure out what you actually need of it. It's a really good point.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, another aspect of this is capturing the interdependencies because, everyone's working on their own thing, and really out of that filtering of information, you really just want to focus on the stuff you give a crap about, if that's the right way to say it. There's
It's
there's
definitely the
so
right way
much,
to say it.
yeah. I mean, there's just so much information, and in a case where you have team dependencies and you're trying to figure out where I care about specific things. You used to be able to use informal communication to learn about dependencies or find, someone might overhear that, oh, the SSO component's changing and that's going to impact me. And I didn't know that before. Well, now you do, because you can actually use the systems to show you where the dependencies are. And when there's changes, you can get communications that there's impacts to those systems. Um, how have you seen teams manage complex dependencies with value stream management? And I know you work a lot with the environment management side. I'd love to hear some stories of how that's played out with the interdependencies.
Yeah, look, I think environments is one place, but I think I'll start by saying that these interdependencies and I guess the difficulty in tracking this really is beyond remote working. Even if
Mm-hmm.
we're all sitting in the same office together, these interdependencies are really hard to track, manually. So, a lot of people are working, doing a lot of parallel activity in small sections or silos when it comes to large scale business. And that's fine, right? Everyone's doing their own little thing, but it's the flow on impact, the upstream and downstream dependencies for applications. It could be, as I've said before, the dependencies on a application version that resides on an environment at one given time.
Yep.
All of those things come into play, and I think being able to better manage that through visibility and get ahead of it before it happens, instead of it being reactionary, being proactive about it and calling it out so that it doesn't cause an impact that you need to fix, has been massive and only achievable through a system.
Yeah, absolutely. What's your thought on, as teams become smaller, more two pizza teams, how do the interdependencies, what's the need on using a system to help communicate the interdependencies? how does that need change?
Yeah, look, I think it's huge. I think regardless of the size of the teams, I think there's always an inherent risk that what you're delivering as a team that's over here on the left might have a flow and impact over to the team on the right. And you know, it's expensive to fix things in production, but also, you know, you can have tension clashes in a lower environment as well. Those visibility when you've got more moving parts just becomes a greater challenge. So getting a full picture is difficult and is very important.
Excellent. Well, let's move on to managing. The next tip is about managing remote development teams. And, you know, really talking about this from the planning all the way into production. You know, in order to get solid management, you know, it's a new problem because you have a challenge to actually see how the team members are doing. And you want to know that they're being productive, that they're doing the right things. You want to remove roadblocks. And you also want to make sure that they're collaborating and doing high quality work. You know, these management tools are normally provided by an in-person interaction. You know, it's a lot easier to see someone struggling or hear somebody complaining or so forth. And really what you need in order to solve this problem is you've got to find a way to make work visible. What are you seeing, Matt, that has changed in the management of teams delivering software since, you know, COVID-19? Has the management of multiple teams in multiple regions changed?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's made a lot of people uncomfortable. I'll
Yeah.
put it that way. I think,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the old world, it works up until a point, right? But I think how you measure somebody's activity these days has changed. It has to, right? You know, it used to be that someone's on the floor, I can see them, therefore they must be working, right?
Right.
Your presence at work was an indicator that you were doing your job. You know, obviously that isn't immeasurable anymore. So it's a more focused on what your outputs are and what you're actually, you know, delivering to the business. So that kind of pivot to kind of becoming comfortable with just, you know, measuring outputs rather than, you know, some of the kind of legacy ways of measuring someone's, you know, work has been a challenge. But I think we're overcoming that, and it's people are becoming more comfortable with that way of working.
Absolutely. Well, and I think part of this is about making the work visible too. So, and it's not just making it making it visible from a management point of view, but making it visible for everyone and transparent. We talked about this briefly before that, you know, if we were able to collect data across the tool chain and correlate it and converge it so that data flows bidirectionally between the tools themselves, in essence, everyone can see what's going on. A converged tool chain unifies the work under a single platform. That makes that, you know, that's all possible because we can align that data to a common data model, and we can standardize or normalize some of the statuses and priorities across the different tools and teams independent of whatever tool they're using or what methodology. And that really creates the final, you know, the coup de grace, if you will, of complete visibility of the value stream itself. And you know, any process or service that delivers a product or service, you know, whether that's the environment management or the releases themselves or deployment plan. And that work visibility allows managers to monitor the team and the individual progress. So if we have a cutover experience and we're now trying to coordinate a lot of people, and that used to be done via the big phone call, you know, there's better ways of doing that. Matt, when you look at the companies you work for, you know, or that you're working with, you know, what are your thoughts about the number of tools that are being currently integrated in the software development lifecycle? Is it changing? Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? What are you seeing there?
That's definitely increasing, and I think the reason for that is that people are now more reliant on tools. You know, days gone by, you could operate with a spreadsheet, right? You could
Mm-hmm.
run a team and a section through spreadsheets or other means, you know, emails, etc. But as we work remotely, the reliance on tools becomes greater, and as people go and shop for tools, you know, they are buying different tools now, and there are more options to market. So I'm definitely seeing a wider variety of tools that then become a requirement to integrate into Platora to get the full picture. So there's definitely been an increase there.
Yeah, I remember reading an email response from one executive that said, "Oh yeah, we're adopting a new standard, and it's not like we got rid of any of the old standard tools we were using before. We're just adding to our mix."
Yep.
What has that really meant though for work visibility and how to see it so you can manage it?
Yeah, it's been key to it, right? So for every tool that's coming online in these organizations, the next step of that is, okay, so how do we take the key parts of what we're doing inside of that tool and bringing it through as a measurable into Platora. So it's creating visibility, it's creating auditability and traceability, and ultimately it's creating better value, better quality, better time to market.
Yeah. And I think part of the key here is the number of tools isn't bad. In fact, that's good. We want people putting their work into a tool because that way we have a chance of integrating to it and we can pull it together and normalize it across and then thus make it visible, add other things to it. And let's talk about another thing that we can add to it. Because once it's in a tool and correlated into a value stream management platform, we can now actually enable the next tip, and that's enabling continuous governance and compliance. And really what we're talking about here is to, put requirements into the software development and delivery lifecycle, in the environment management cycle, or in the deployment process. And governance is that best practices, and it used to be hierarchical in a waterfall process. And we could impose really rigorous reviews at different stages, and here's the hierarchy of process going to happen. But DevOps and decentralized development have changed all that, and remote development has changed it more. And when working remotely, there's really no one looking over the shoulder to make sure that we're doing the right things. Pair programming is harder, a lot harder now. Making sure that production changes or environment changes are made the right way is harder. So having a system that can help here is really the way to go, that standardizes the process. So what are you seeing? How has managing governance changed since COVID-19?
Yeah, look, I think the key to this is, and it kind of back to my previous point, is that time's gone by. A lot of teams were operating in kind of ad hoc spreadsheets or emails, and they were getting by with that. But one of the inherent risks of that is that there is less governance and compliance and traceability. So this kind of transition into more of a system-centric kind of world, through that as a byproduct, increases governance and compliance because there's visibility, there's generally embedded workflows. It just increases all of that compliance in a nice way. So I think it has increased, and it's been a good thing. But I think also, I see a lot of the time, it's this fine line with governance and compliance, right? What we're trying to do is basically mitigate risk. We want to ensure that there's enough compliance that we don't have any problems down the track. We also don't want that compliance to become such red tape that it obviously hinders our ability to do stuff in a timely way. So it's kind of that walking the sweet spot of enough to mitigate risk, but also not enough to hinder our ability to deliver.
Absolutely. And that's the whole secret, isn't it? How do you actually pull that off? Well, I think part of what helps this is to standardize the process. As you get going forward, you've got to bring governance into your software delivery process, not to be documented, but to be standardized, to have it automated as much as possible, shifted left as much as you can, and just templatize so that you can make sure that what is, the best practice is going to happen. Put phases and gates into that delivery so that you can make sure the right things are happening. Since you have a converged tool chain, you can then push required steps into the different tools and make them happen. What this does is make your process repeatable, and it effectively makes non-compliance difficult. And anytime that people aren't really following the process, it's easily identifiable. If threat modeling is a key part of your process, great, push that into your, every time somebody creates a new fixed version in Jira, now a new release is created, and then they get a new non-functional requirement saying, make sure this new feature has a threat model associated to it. When it comes into the delivery phase, it's like, well, is there a threat model? Did that item get completed? It's really easy to see, it's visible, and the process is standardized. Everybody knows that I've got to do it. Embedding these requirements into the workflow really automates the governance and makes the compliance continuous. It's always happening. It's automatic. It's just going on. And capture the work flowing through the processes in a value stream management platform accelerates the audit process, because audit is easy. Just run a report on any release, run a report on a delivery pipeline, and you can see exactly where you are. Here's your compliance. You want HIPAA compliance? Here's all the requirements. You want to verify your DevSecOps pipeline? Here you go, and you can just make that work. Matt, how have you seen process standardization help teams, particularly in these remote situations?
Yeah, look, I think standardization, from what I can, what I've seen with our customers, is really just about taking all of the things that we do really well and repeating it, and discarding anything that might be wasteful or inefficient. So kind of lending to that repeatable kind of ideology. Let's just, if it works well, let's do that again. But I guess the biggest part of that whole equation is, how do you know what you're doing well? You need to be able to measure it, right? So I think for our customers, the first part is saying, okay, well, we know what we're doing. First of all, what's good, what's bad, what's the ugly, and we'll discard anything that's not good. We'll make it repeatable.
Yep.
And then we'll continue through that that process and better refine it later.
Exactly. Well, and you kind of hinted at the fourth tip, which is continuous improvement. You can't improve what you can't measure, and you can't manage what you can't measure. You can't really do a whole lot of anything with the things you don't measure. And one of the primary goals of a value stream management platform is to give you direct views of performance across every value stream, across every process, so that you can identify bottlenecks, opportunities for improvement, and provide future state proposed processes to improve the performance and the bottlenecks. How have you seen measurement of outputs of software delivery or environments team? How have you seen the measurement of that change since COVID-19?
Yeah, look, I think it's been quite a big change, and I think a lot of it flows from the prioritization or the reprioritization of what you're delivering to market, and that's a flow-on impact of stuff like staffing levels. Here in the United Kingdom, we've got a bunch of customers, and a lot of people in general, are on furlough. Big businesses have a reduced headcount, so if you've got a reduced headcount, you need to prioritize what you're delivering to market and make sure that it is, the best thing that we can be delivering. So, the need to be able to measure the value of what we're doing and the efficiency of it has been really, really crucial.
Absolutely. And one of the common questions that I've gotten a lot is, what kind of metrics and what kind of things should I be looking at? And a suggestion here for a number of them is to, it's useful to really look at some key metrics as part of any delivery pipeline. There's two that stand out to me that have been pretty high value, and one are the DevOps research and assessment metrics, the DORA metrics. Really looking at deployment frequency, lead time, change failure rate, and MTTR is pretty critical. And a lot has been written on those metrics. And if you're new to that, please dive in and take a look. One of the primary values of a value stream management platform is to help you achieve those metrics. That's the point. But not only those metrics, but some of the flow metrics, looking instead of where the DevOps metrics just look at them from check-in to deployment, the more flow-oriented metrics look at it from ideation all the way to production. And there's various aspects of metrics too that are interesting, from the utilization or conflicts and percentage conflicting in environments and how those play out. Hey Matt, what have you seen that have changed using metrics in this new normal? And do you have any examples of what's changed?
Look, I think I alluded to it before, but I think the main change now is more traceability around velocity and quality for us. How
Hmm.
fast can we deliver something out to market? How much value does that item have? And what's the quality of what we're delivering, right? It's we don't want to have to fix forward. Those are kind of the fundamentals when we come to kind of the software delivery space. And from the environment space, we've been seeing a lot of activity around kind of cloud migration, people doing on-demand cloud orchestration and stuff like that with their test environments, which
Hmm.
is all well and good. But as a ramification of that, we're seeing a lot of increased, in costing. If I can have an environment whenever I want it and spin it up, there's a bill shock that comes at the back end of that. So,
Yep.
auditability and traceability when it comes to stuff like asking for a test environment, as opposed to maybe sharing it with someone that you're compatible with, and kind of takes us back to that interdependency kind of conversation, right? Am I compatible? Is there a dependency there? Therefore, maybe we can test in the same environment and save a lot of money. So I would say, fundamentally, they're the main ones we're seeing at the moment.
Absolutely. And related to that, of course, you talked about reducing some of the waste in the processes, and one of the key goals of the measurement is to look at the inefficiencies and the bottlenecks. You want to optimize anytime there's wait or idle time at any part of the process. And value stream management tools provide the key metrics you need to actually visualize and see these things. You got to bring this to the forefront so that it can be addressed. Have you seen, while you've been working with Patora, we're a value stream management platform. Have you seen performance increase as people reduce waste in their value streams?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's multiple ways that we see that. Again, it's that output emphasis or
Hmm.
re-emphasis on kind of what are you delivering as opposed to kind of just banging hammers needlessly. But also, I think just examples like, for instance, it could be something like if you're doing a lower level spinning up of an environment or deploying to a lower level environment. Plan versus actual reporting helps you obviously baseline measure what you anticipate doing, but then retrospectively being able to check out your actuals and say, well, there's an inefficiency here, here, and here. Let's hone in on that and better the process. So we've got customers, for example, that have, it used to take days to do a deployment like that, and we've brought it down to several hours. So you can kind of hone in on what you do, identify what's good, what's bad, discard or keep, and repeat. So, it's been pretty cool.
And when you brought it down to several hours, what was the impact of COVID-19 on that? How, now that everybody's remote, how much impacted was that process?
It's huge, right? Because it's about availability. The longer a process, the shorter a process takes, the quicker something is readily available to you. So you're sitting there on the bench waiting to do an action. It has a huge flow on impact. It's particularly if you think about a lot of these companies that might use an SI to provide environments as a service.
Mhm.
Part of their SLA is making sure that you as a testing team or as a part of a project have environment availability. So each time I take it down, there's a risk for every time that it's delayed. So it has huge impacts.
Absolutely. And a lot of this that we're talking about, these are kind of cultural changes that we're really poking at. There's a reference from a topology of organizational cultures that is brought up that in order to achieve performance, we have to have better cooperation. But in order to improve cooperation, we have to understand the culture of our teams. If we're in a power-oriented team, excuse me, the expectation is people are looking for their own world of rule, if you will, and they're only wanting their fiefdom in their domain. And on the other side is we're looking for actual performance. We're looking for delivery, and the only way to achieve high delivery is with high cooperation. And it's a difference where messengers, for example, and one side are shot versus the other side is we want to train messengers so they do the right thing. Do we shirk responsibilities or do we share the risks? Is security the responsibility of the security guy? Is quality the responsibility of the quality guy? Or is that everyone's responsibility? Because your approach to these kinds of questions is very much your cultural acceptance of how you'll do with, how your effectiveness will be in a remote work world, and how effective you'll be as you adopt value stream management principles. Um, do you have any advice of what teams should do to become more performance oriented?
Yeah, look, I think to be performance oriented is basically leveraging everything that we've spoken about up until now, right? I think it's about repeatability, and process refinement. I think it's about auditability and traceability, ensuring that the communication streams are as efficient as they can be. So,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm solely relying on Slack or solely relying on Zoom, that's an inefficiency in the communication, which then has a flow-on impact to being performance orientated, because my outputs are obviously hindered. So I think it's about zoning in, and everybody's going to be different, right? And I think the first part of that we always advise is kind of, you have to have an honest evaluation of where you sit. Nobody's perfect. There is no kind of nirvana as far as I've seen, right? We've all got kind of stuff under the rug, and it's about identifying your weak points and working on them.
Yeah, and I'll make a particular note here, as we've talked about in our tips to, put communication more into systems. If your culture is much more power oriented, it gets harder to do that. People will misread a text message as much as they'll misread a comment on a ticket. And gosh, you've got to have the culture and address the culture. That's the time when you got to bring people together to help them understand the transition towards performance oriented, and that in order to get there, we have to change some of the cooperation, how we deal with responsibilities, how we deal with messengers, how we deal even with failure. Failure is not a bad thing. We learn from it. Which kind of, pulled some of this from a recent talk or a recent article by Gartner, 3 steps to, sustain productivity and collaboration in remote agile teams. And their view is to actually create a culture of continuous flow of information, along with a continuous flow of work and a continuous flow of value. If you excuse me, if you look at the performance oriented culture, you have to create, in essence, communities of practice. Look at creating Slack teams that focus on quality or security, create distribution lists that are release oriented or improvement. Make sure to share the responsibilities for quality, security, reliability. We're a cloud-based kind of a startup software company, and we have less than 200 employees, yet we have a release manager. That's, in a lot of companies, that's not seen as a that seemed like a legacy thing, but his job really is to coach all of our teams as we develop software to make sure that we're managing risk in the right way. We do use failure as a learning tool. We have mistakes, and we go through our root cause analysis to figure out, why did this happen, and how do we automate and make sure it doesn't happen again. From an agile and continuous flow of work, one of our goals, we're a value stream management platform. We use our own tool to make work visible in our own tool chain. We are able to quantify that work and look at places for waste and wait times. The standard kind of making work visible practices. I love that book by Dominica de Grandis about making work visible. Limiting work in progress, the unknown dependencies, the unplanned work, and so forth. They all come out as you can make that work transparent across the business itself. And then finally, looking at the continuous flow of value, you've got to have ways to still, while everything's going through the system, still have your regular catch-up routines, but they'll be different. You can then say, hey, everything's in the system. How's everybody doing? Do your stand-ups to talk about roughly what they're doing. So then when they see it in the system, they'll know what's happening. Use the collaboration tools to integrate and have integrate with each other, but not only with each other, but with the tool chains. We have release informations that come out into Slack, and that's perfect. Record your meetings. I know on our I work with a product team, and so we record our customer interactions so that we can share them with each other and link these things across the requirements and so forth. these are just some of the connections and benefits of a value stream management platform such as Plutora, that we help enable these kinds of things and changing the culture around developing software in this new normal. Hey, Matt, so how are you seeing customers connect and with collaboration tools in this new normal?
Yeah, look, I think, as we've spoken about before, I think there's a greater reliance on tools, which is, it's been a great thing. I've also found a willingness to be uncomfortable with new roles. And what I mean by that is kind of in the old world, it seemed like you kind of had your little square and there was hard boundaries on what my role was defined to be. But through the necessity of change, people are taking on different roles or kind of merging roles together and being a little bit uncomfortable. Change can be hard sometimes, but I feel like people are stepping up, identifying where they need to kind of fill in a gap, and they're doing that. So it's been really cool to see that.
Absolutely. Well, just kind of wrapping up. If you haven't gotten the message, you should invest into a value stream management platform, something to help manage the tooling you've got, especially and most importantly in this remote work world. Plutora, we're a value stream management platform. We've got we converge the tool chain. We've got pipeline orchestration, deployment management orchestration, a lot of things we talked about around the hybrid environment management and all the analytics and governance and insights that come along with it. We have a special right now that, if you get started now, we understand that folks are in a financial crunch. We'll give you 3 months free when you subscribe, just to help get this process started. Want to thank you, Matt, and we'll turn the time over to a few questions. I know I've got one. Looks like we might have time for a couple, but the question is the question says, how do I get started with a value stream management platform?
Yeah, look, I think it's a good question. It's like anything, right? It's like the first thing to improving a problem is to acknowledge that you've got one, right? I think look, at the end of the day, if you look at anything and try and boil the ocean, it becomes overwhelming. So the way I look at it is pick your low-hanging fruit, kind of pick the things that are giving you the most grief, focus on those areas and improve them, and then expand from there, right? I don't think that the big bang approach is necessarily the best way to go about it, but everyone's got different pain points and different areas in which there are inefficiencies. So just kind of hone in on what's causing the most amount of pain and start with fixing that first.
Absolutely. Are there's a question about traditional environments with remote work. Any trends you see?
The trends I see, it all comes down to visibility, for sure. But we have, I have seen issues with, again, the kind of spreadsheets, and this isn't specific to environments. We'll use that as an example, though, of kind of where there isn't a tool in place or a system that they're using to manage this. The clashing and the contention and the governance and traceability about who asked for what. Because again, a lot of these requests, if you think about a software project, right, it can be starting 6, 12, 18 months ago. And a lot of the requests for the testing environments happened a long time ago as well. So, without those tools, I am seeing a lot of customers struggle with that visibility.
Absolutely. We're out of time. I will, thank you very much, Matt. I love your insight.
Pleasure.
This has been a really fun conversation. Charlene, we will turn it back over to you to wrap us up.
All right, great. Everybody who did submit a question, if we didn't get to it, I apologize, but please know that Jeff and the folks at Plutora will be getting a copy of all of the questions, so you will still get your question answered. Okay, so before we close things out, I do want to do the drawing for the two $50 Amazon gift cards. So without further ado, let's get to that. Our winners today are Joe H. Congratulations, Joe. And Sylvia W. Congratulations to you both. We'll be following up with you offline by email to get your gift card over to you, so please check your inbox. And also want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the event, or if you just want to watch it again, you'll have the opportunity to do so. We will be sending out an email later today that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the devops.com website, so you can always go look for it there. Just go to www.devops.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section. It should be right there waiting for you. Jeff and Matt, thank you so much for a great presentation, as always.
Thank you much. Thanks for having us.
All
Yeah,
right.
thank you.
I also want to thank the audience for joining me today. And this is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Stay safe, everybody.